Wow. Today's deep dive is, well, let's just say things in Syria are pretty wild right now.
Hmm?
We're talking complete collapse of the Assad regime, like poof, gone. Rebels are in control, and we're getting all these crazy discoveries coming out.
Yeah, the speed of it all is really something. It's just days ago, Assad's running the show, and now he's what, on a plane to Russia? Asking for asylum. Makes you think, doesn't it? What happens when a leader accused of, such awful things? What happens when they basically get a free pass?
It does. It's like we're watching some kind of real-life political thriller unfold. And speaking of unfolding, we're basing our deep dive today on this article from UPI. It's called Syria's Rebel Leader, No Pardons for Detainee Torturers, Killers. And it was just published yesterday, December 11th, 2024. It's really getting into the nitty-gritty of what's happening right now.
And it's not just about a regime change, it's what's coming out afterward. We're talking about Assad's prisons, and the discoveries there are, well, they're horrific.
Okay, so let's unpack all this, starting with, Assad's fall from power. Even for those of us who follow the Syrian civil war, this was sudden.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. This war has been dragging on for over a decade, right? Brutal, complex. You'd expect any power shift to be this slow, grinding thing. But this rebel offensive, it was like lightning.
The article really focuses on this group, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS. They're the ones who led the charge, headed by this guy, Ahmad Sharaa, also known as Abu Muhammad al-Jalani.
And what's interesting is Shara's not just going for power. He's already talking about justice, vowing to hunt down anyone involved with torture and killings under Assad. And not just in Syria, anywhere. He's calling for other countries to extradite them.
That's a big statement to make, especially with the scale of the crimes we're talking about here. It's like he's putting the whole world on notice.
Yeah, it's a complicated situation for sure. And it gets even more so when you add in Assad escaping to Russia. That's a huge move geopolitically. The consequences could reach way beyond Syria.
You've got the Syrian Network for Human Rights calling for Russia to extradite Assad. So he could face trial for, crimes against humanity, war crimes. But, I mean, is that even realistic?
Honestly, given Russia and Assad's relationship, extradition seems unlikely. But just the fact it's being discussed, it shines a light on international justice, or the lack of it. It's like, does a dictator get a free pass just because they get asylum in a powerful country? That's a dangerous precedent.
Yeah, absolutely. But while all that plays out, let's look at what's happening in Syria itself. This article paints a really grim picture, especially around the prisons. It talks about people rushing to Sednaya prison, desperately looking for loved ones.
Heartbreaking, isn't it? To not know for years. Clinging to this tiny hope, maybe their loved one's alive, and then to be faced with the reality of a place like Sednaya.
Yeah, the article quotes Raid al-Saleh from the White Helmets. He calls Sednaya a human slaughterhouse and talks about bodies and ovens. It's chilling.
It is. These revelations are just horrifying, and they can't be ignored. They have to shape how the world responds to Syria now.
And then there are those photos online of executed prisoners from Sednaya. It's just a gut punch, this stark reminder of the brutality that was hidden for so long.
It's the systematic nature of it all, the sheer number of victims. It raises serious questions about accountability, like who's responsible? How do you even begin to untangle a system like that?
And it's not just the confirmed dead. There are cases like Austin Tice, the American journalist who vanished back in 2012. It adds another layer to this whole thing.
Yeah, his case has been a worry for years internationally. But now, with the regime change, there's this new urgency.
His parents recently heard that he's alive and being cared for, but they don't know who has him or where he is exactly. U.S. Special Envoy for Hostage Affairs, Roger Carstens, he's in Beirut now, trying to get Tice back.
Those hostage negotiations, they're so delicate. And in a volatile situation like this, who knows what's going on behind the scenes? They need to independently verify that Tice is okay.
The State Department says Syria's been holding him, but the Syrian government denies it. And now, with Assad gone, who do you even talk to? Every answer just leads to more questions.
Tice's case, in a lot of ways, it represents the bigger issue of detainees and justice in Syria. It's about accountability, transparency, and just knowing what happened to loved ones.
So with all this happening, what's Damascus like right now? The article says the rebels lifted the curfew and are telling people to go back to work. It's like they're trying to project this sense of, normalcy.
Well, trying to get things in order after that kind of chaos is a huge task. It's not just rebuilding buildings, it's rebuilding trust, community, a whole functioning society.
The former Syrian Prime Minister Mohammed al-Jalali, he was on Al Arabiya TV. He said Damascus is stable, at least for now. But he also said he hasn't been able to reach Assad. So where does Assad even fit into this now? Is he really out? Or is this, just the start of a whole new chapter in this thing?
That's the big question, isn't it? And the answer could affect the whole region. But before we go there, there's this one detail from the article.
You're talking about the rebels setting fire to Hafiz al-Assad's grave, right? Assad's father.
Yeah, exactly. It's symbolic, a deliberate break. It makes you wonder, can you really have a new Syria without dealing with the ghosts of the old one?
It's a powerful image, that burning gravesite. Really says a lot about the changes happening in Syria. But you're right, we have a lot more to talk about, especially what all of this means for, other countries in the region.
Right.
You said earlier that Assad getting asylum in Russia could embolden other leaders, the authoritarian ones. Could this actually, spark more unrest instead of less?
It's a valid concern, yeah. Put yourself in the shoes of, say, a dictator in a neighboring country. Watching all this happen, seeing Assad, accused of these terrible things, but given a safe haven by a global power, what kind of message does that send?
It's almost like a green light, isn't it? Like, hey, if things go bad, there's a way out. They might just double down on being oppressive, thinking they have a backup plan.
Exactly, and that could really hurt any democratic movements in those countries, and human rights efforts, too. People might not speak out or demand change if they think it's hopeless.
It almost feels like this whole thing, it just throws a wrench in international justice. What's the point of holding anyone accountable if their powerful friends will protect them?
It raises big questions about how we handle these things globally, not just in the Middle East.
I see that, yeah. It's easy to focus on the crisis right now, but this could shift alliances, power dynamics globally, even make things like climate change or terrorism harder to deal with if countries are just refusing to work together.
Cooperation is tough when there's no trust, and this whole situation, it breeds distrust, not just between, say, Russia and the West, but between a lot of nations.
So back to Syria itself. Let's talk about the new leadership. What kind of challenges do they have trying to rebuild? It seems impossible.
It's definitely one of the most complex situations any new government has faced. You've got a country shattered by years of war, deep divisions, a wrecked economy, and violence could break out at any time.
And the world is watching them, every single move. Plus, they have to deal with, the remnants of Assad's regime maybe hiding out there. How do you even start to create unity and stability in that environment?
It's a huge undertaking. The first thing is a legitimate government, one that's inclusive, representing all the different Syrian people, which is a challenge in itself, considering how fractured things are politically.
And then there's the whole question of justice and accountability. We've talked about the atrocities under Assad, but how do they address that in a way that's fair, but also helps the country heal?
It's a tough balance. Ignoring the crimes would be a big mistake. It would say that those in power can do whatever they want, and that would hurt any chance of reconciliation.
So what's the answer then? Trials, truth and reconciliation commissions. How do you deal with that level of violence?
Honestly, you probably need a bunch of things. Maybe trials, truth-seeking, paying reparations to victims, and a real commitment to healing as a society. And it has to be done in a way that considers all Syrians, their needs and concerns.
It sounds like it'll take years, maybe decades of work.
It will. It won't be easy, but it's essential for Syria to have a chance at peace and prosperity.
This has been really insightful, but I'm kind of overwhelmed. It's a lot to process. What should the average person take away from this? How do we even begin to understand something this complex?
I think the important thing is to remember, even geopolitics, it comes down to people, real people whose lives have been destroyed, families torn apart, people just trying to survive. And we may not have the answers, but we can try to understand their stories, to see the human cost of this conflict.
Yeah, it's easy to get caught up in the politics, the global stuff, but it all comes back to people. And I think that's what's so disturbing about it all.
Exactly. It's a reminder that even in our connected world, terrible things are still happening. And it's a call to stay informed, to pay attention, and to demand better from our leaders.
And that we're not powerless, even if it feels that way. We can support aid groups, advocate for human rights, raise awareness. Even small things can help make the world a little better.
Absolutely. And maybe the most important thing is to listen to each other, to try and understand different points of view, to build empathy.
That's powerful and really relevant now when things feel so divided. We need to remember that even with these huge challenges, there's still room for compassion, for understanding, and for hope.
And speaking of hope, remember the former Syrian prime minister saying Damascus is stable? It's a small sign that maybe things can be rebuilt, that they can move forward.
It's a little bit of light in a really dark situation, but I'll take it. It reminds us that even in chaos, there's always a chance for things to improve.
And that brings us to another crucial point, the role of the international community. What can other countries do to help Syria through this transition?
That's a huge question, and one we need to think about carefully. But it's a good place to start as we wrap up this part of our deep dive. So we've talked about all the challenges facing Syria, the shadow of Assad's regime and the ripples this could cause in the region around the world. But what's next? How can the world actually help Syria with this transition? What does, responsible intervention even look like in this mess?
That's the big question, and honestly, there's no easy answer. But I think we can break it down into a few areas. First off, humanitarian aid, that's crucial, absolutely essential. Syria's in ruins, the economy's gone, millions of people have been displaced. Meeting those immediate needs has to come first.
I can only imagine the scale of it all: food, water, shelter, medical care, everything.
It's a nightmare, logistically, and it needs a global effort, sustained. But it's more than just the basics. We have to think long-term, too. Rebuilding schools, hospitals, the infrastructure, helping Syria get back on its feet, not just a temporary fix.
It's about letting Syrians rebuild their own lives, their own country, right?
Exactly, and that leads to the second big thing: supporting a stable government. One that's legitimate, so working with Syrian civil society, encouraging dialogue, helping create institutions that actually answer to the people.
I bet that's where it gets really tough. After all that conflict, oppression, how do you even build trust in the government again?
It's a long process, and it needs inclusivity, transparency, a real willingness to deal with the past, and it means pushing back against any attempts to go back to authoritarianism.
So no more, shady deals or ignoring human rights?
Absolutely not. The world has to use its influence to push for real democracy, and that means holding everyone accountable, no matter their politics.
Which brings us back to justice and accountability, right?
Yeah.
How do you address all those awful things that happen without messing up the peace?
It's a tricky balance, but ignoring the crimes would be a huge mistake. It would basically say that those in power can get away with anything, and that would wreck any attempts at reconciliation.
So what do you do then? Trials? Truth commissions? What's the best way?
You probably need a lot of things: legal stuff, truth-seeking, reparations, a commitment to healing, and it has to consider all Syrians.
It sounds like a huge task, one that'll take, a long time.
It will, and it won't be easy, but it's vital if Syria wants a future with peace and hopefully prosperity.
This whole conversation has been so insightful, but I do have one last question. With all these challenges, the divisions, the geopolitics, can Syria really recover?
Yeah.
Is there a path to peace and stability that's, actually possible?
I'm cautiously optimistic. The Syrian people are incredibly resilient. And there are some signs, even small ones, that they're ready to move on. It'll depend on a lot of things, inside and outside Syria. But I think with the right help from the world, they can overcome this and build something better.
It's a long road ahead, but that's a good note to end on. This deep dive has been, eye-opening, that's for sure. We talked about Assad's fall, the horrors in his prisons, rebuilding a country that's been shattered, and what the world can do.
It's a situation that needs our attention, our empathy, and our commitment to making the world a little more just, a little more peaceful. It shows that even when things seem impossible, there's still hope. And even small acts can make a difference.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. Stay curious, stay informed, and most importantly, stay engaged, because the world needs people who care, who are willing to learn, and who are ready to act.